The NBA is in an interesting spot now that they have their 7, 8, 9, 10 playoff scenarios out there. Tuesday, that's tomorrow, you will have the 7 and the 7 seed determined. And then on Thursday, you will find out who the 8 seed is. On Wednesday, you will find out who the 7 seed is in the Western Conference. And on Friday, you will find out who the 8 seed is. The game that is going to get by far the most attention, although there are a bunch of different teams here, 4 in the East and 4 in the West that are involved, is Warriors going up against the Lakers. Steph Curry, Draymond Green, that big duo. Klay Thompson, of course, still out, going up against LeBron James and Anthony Davis as the Lakers attempt to defend their NBA title with potentially the best they could be, a 7 seed. It's also possible that the Lakers could end up an 8 seed. They're going to have to go through a really challenging gauntlet in order to win the Western Conference. The question is, and I think it's a good one, does NBA seeding matter at all? Or, as he has done in the past, can LeBron James and this year's Lakers, can they flip a switch and effectively say, hey, we're ready to win a championship now? Because if you look at the futures odds, the Nets are a pretty substantial favorite, plus 210. That means if you bet $100, you would get back $210 in the event the Nets win the championship. I'm looking at FanDuel's odds, by the way. The Lakers are the next most likely team, even though they could maybe not even make it into the traditional playoff, at 5-1, followed by the Clippers at 6-1, the Jazz at 6-1. Then the Bucks and the Sixers are both at 8-1. And from there, big underdog odds for a lot of additional teams. So, question that is out there is, how desperate is the NBA for both, and I think the answer is really desperate, for both Steph and LeBron to make the NBA playoffs? I think they are massively, massively desperate for that to occur. So the best case scenario for the NBA is for either the Warriors or the Lakers, which will happen, to win that number 7 seed, and then whoever loses that game to go on and be the 8 seed. Because whether it's Steph Curry or LeBron James, there's going to be a lot more people interested in watching that team play than if it's the Spurs or certainly if it's the Grizz. Even though those teams have got some good young talent, there's just no way near the level of interest in those teams as there would be in the teams of Steph Curry and LeBron James. So, Dub, as a fan of the Spurs, do you feel like that the fix is going to be in if the Spurs were able to beat the Grizz, and let's say they were playing against the Lakers for that overall number 8 seed, or frankly against the Warriors? As a Spurs fan, would you be like, there's no way the NBA is going to let us win?
You know, I'm not usually the conspiracy guy.
Yes.
You know, that's just not my style typically. But I would be shocked by, at the end of that night, and it doesn't even matter who's playing. It's the loser of that first game against the winner of the other game in the Western Conference, Lakers or the Warriors against the Spurs or the Grizzlies, that final win and get in game.
Friday night game.
If the Warriors/Lakers don't have more fouls called on them than the Spurs or the Grizzlies do, it doesn't even matter if that one of those West Coast teams will have more free throw attempts than the Spurs or the Grizzlies. I would be shocked if that's not the case.
The NBA doesn't do itself any favors because it does definitely feel the most like the WWE, because players are constantly whining to officials. Coaches are doing the same thing. And to be fair, I think over the course of a game, a NBA basketball official, to me, has more control than a Major League Baseball umpire does. And let me explain what I mean by that. Primarily because, like, I'm just using an example, Major League Baseball umpire. First of all, they have replay in a big way. But also, you can tell pretty easily if a ball or a strike should be called, and you can tell whether somebody's out at first base or second base. And I know Braves fans are like, really? Can we really tell? Did you see what happened to us at home plate against the – yeah, I know every now and then they totally miss one in baseball. but the overall of umpiring in baseball, and I think even in the NFL, because you can go back and make choices. You can see whether or not somebody fumbled, see whether or not somebody's foot got in. I know probably holding is the call that you look at and you say, man, you could call that anytime. Maybe roughing the passer sometimes can be a very arbitrary call, and it's frustrating in the NFL. But I don't think, maybe in soccer, because the decision over a red card is so punitive that if you send a player off and you make the other team have to play with 10 guys, that can be such a seismic and monumental choice. But other than that, I feel like NBA officials have the most control over the way a game goes and the way that they officiate it. And so I'm going to be honest with you. I think the NBA, which no one is watching, they just set their lowest all-time record, 13% decline from last year, which was previously the worst on record. I think Adam Silver and the NBA are going to do whatever. Like if LeBron James lost 2 straight games and the Lakers got eliminated before the playoffs really even got started, I would bet almost every dollar that I have that's free and able and clear to be gambled on that there's no way that the Lakers are going to miss the regular season playoffs. Now, in a 7-game series, if they're the 8 seed, could they lose to the Jazz? If they're the 7 seed, could they lose this? Anything can happen in a 7-game series. But there's a reason the Lakers are still the favorite in the Western Conference. But even over and above the fact that they are still the favorites, the NBA has to have LeBron. Because if LeBron's not in the Western Conference Finals and the NBA Finals, nobody in the West or the West is going to draw much interest. I mean, this honestly, like think about it. LeBron people care about, Steph Curry people care about. I think most everybody out there would acknowledge the Warriors don't have the horses to get to the Western Conference Finals. So you're talking about a scenario where if the seeding held, you would have the Jazz going up against the Suns. Nobody's watching that series. Most people don't care at all about the Jazz or the Suns. And I understand if you're a Utah fan or you're a Phoenix Sun, you're like, I'm watching. Yeah, I understand it. But I'm talking about the general casual basketball fan. Most people don't really know the Jazz or the Suns. And so you could maybe get in with Kawhi and the Clippers and Paul George. They're at least well known enough. But I really don't think if the seeding held and 1 versus 2 in the Western Conference was the Suns going up against the Jazz, it's a unique and interesting matchup, but nobody would watch. The NBA has to have LeBron in the Western Conference Finals at a minimum. They need him in the NBA Finals. They desperately need Lakers against, I think, the Nets. There are a lot of teams that could come out of the East where I think they'd be fine with it if it were LeBron James going up against them. But LeBron is the straw that stirs the drink, and nobody's watching the NBA right now. Maybe people will get interested in the NBA if the Lakers win and to play their way in this play-in series. But Adam Silver is, I don't want to say he's instituting the code red, but the NBA is in such desperate straits that if LeBron tweaked his ankle, let's say, in a serious way and was not able to play on Wednesday or Friday or his season was over, I think Adam Silver would curl up in the fetal position and just start crying. I really do. I think that's how bad of a shape the NBA is in. By the way, NHL playoffs are underway. Nobody's talking about this. You know the Canadian teams aren't even allowed to come across the border right now, and they're not sure what date they're going to be allowed to come across the border. It's one thing to talk about the trouble that the NBA is in, but it's as if no one is talking about this. So they have 4 different 4-team playoff pods, basically, in the NHL. 12 of the teams are in the United States. 4 of the teams are in Canada, and they won't allow right now for an American team to come into Canada without quarantining or for a Canadian team to leave to come to America to play a game and then go back to Canada. This is a big story that I feel like nobody is discussing. Canada is so wrapped up in COVID cosmetic theater that they are not allowing an American hockey team to cross the border to play a series against whoever emerges as Canada's champion, and they simultaneously are not allowing the Canadian team to come to America. I mean, this is a big deal, and other sports have figured out how to do it because in Toronto, the Raptors didn't play in Toronto all year. They just basically relocated to Florida, which, by the way, a lot of Canadians do. There's a lot of people in Canada who are like, hey, I'm going to Florida. A lot of Canadians came down to Florida to get their vaccines because they couldn't get the vaccines delivered very well under Trudeau in Canada. And also, the Toronto Blue Jays are staying in Florida as well. So this is a big story in hockey that nobody's really talking about. They haven't gotten permission yet for the Canadian teams to be able to actually cross into America or for the American teams to go back into Canada. I don't know how this is all going to work out. It's kind of a big deal. Maybe that should be worked out. Maybe they should be like, hey, how are we going to figure out the Stanley Cup here? And also, by the way, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the next segment, Canada's not allowing any crowds present for anything. Some of these American teams are going to have monster crowds. Canada hasn't won the Cup since 93 or 95 or whatever the heck it is. That's not going to help them at all either.